Good morning and welcome to the webinar. This is another in the TEDx Learning Series webinars offered by TEDx, and we are so excited today. We have a very large group of 153 folks around the world who should be logging in. So I'm just going to talk for a minute while we log in. I'm going to give you an overlay of what we'll be doing. We'd like to welcome Rhonda Carnegie, the Director of Global Partnerships from TED. I am Julianne Worm. I founded and run TEDx East in New York City. Rhonda is calling in from the West Coast, and I'm on the East Coast, so we want to especially thank her for getting up so early to work with us today. Let's talk about the webinar goals. Now, many of you have attended the TEDx Learning Series before, so you know that this is always designed to support you in your production of events, and I think that this month we have a particularly exciting topic. The goals are that we're going to explore how we view partnerships and how to manage the process of building partnerships, and what are some of the do's and don'ts as you're engaging partners at the local level. And just some housekeeping, some quick housekeeping to give you an idea of what to expect. The webinar will last exactly 1 hour. So right now it's 9:02 Eastern Standard Time. We will end precisely at 10 a.m. During the webinar, there will be the opportunity to participate in polls, and we're going to conduct a few in just a moment. We ask that we have as many voices chime in as possible. Additionally, during the webinar, you can be sending in questions at any time. On your control panel that you have up on your screen, you should see the option for questions. Let's make sure that everybody finds that, takes a moment and finds that, because as Rhonda is talking, I will be gathering up questions that come up on the screen, and that will be presented at the end. I'll be able to talk to her and share your questions with Rhonda. So we want to make sure that whatever kind of questions about this topic, sponsorship and partnering, we'd like to make sure that you ask, take the opportunity to ask. And also, in November, Laura Galloway, who handles PR for TED, is going to do a webinar, and we're going to get into the kind of how to build your event, what are the branding guidelines going through that, press releases, what are some of the most tricky spots that have come up. Laura has noticed in the last year since the launch of TEDx, so an invitation for that will be going out soon, and we invite you to join us. Okay, now we're going to practice some polling. And so the first poll that we want to know, we want to get a little bit of background information to share with Rhonda. And let's find out. We want to know how large is your TEDx event? Is it under 50? Is it 50 to 100? Is it over 100 or over 250? And while these polls happen, we give about 30 seconds. And right now we're at about 20 seconds. We've had 55%, 61% of the attendees vote. And at about 30 seconds, I'll go ahead and stop. And there we are right now. I'll close it and share it out. You should all be able to see on your screen that about 10% of you have under 50 at your event. Half of you have 50 to 100. And then a little bit under half have 100 and up, but with the 40% of that being over 250. Wow, that's impressive. We're going to go ahead and do another poll to get a little bit of background information, and we'd like to know how many TEDx events have you hosted already up to this point. And so we're looking at this, and I'm seeing that for a very large percentage of you, about 3/4 at this point, this is your first TEDx event. And we have about 64% of the attendees having voted. I'm going to go ahead and close it out and share this. And what we see is that about 70% of you, wow, this will be your first event. We have 12%, 8%, 12%. Wow, 5 or more. 5 or more. I salute you. That's a lot. That's a big commitment. That's impressive. And we're going to just have you participate in one more poll for us, because we'd like to know where everybody is. And where in the world are you located? In the Americas, Middle East, Asia, Europe, or the developing world? And we were limited. We couldn't put every continent because the GoToMeeting only permits us so many. So forgive us, humor us in the way that we categorized the different places in the world. Okay, so great. We've had about 3/4 of you vote. We're going to go ahead and close it down now. And what we see is that so 61% are in the Americas, about 50% in Asia, 18% in Europe, and 3% in the developing world. Fantastic. Well, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Rhonda Carnegie from TED. Rhonda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's so great for us to be able to chat with you about partnership here at TED, and certainly a big welcome for those of you who've never hosted a TEDx event before. The figuring out the funding piece of it is always a major idea to think about. So I thought I'd start off by talking to you a little bit about what we mean when we talk about TED partnership. It's so interesting as I go from conference to conference, the notion between what is a sponsorship and what is a partnership. And at TED, we really feel that partnership is about bringing together a group of corporations. Thanks, you go next one. About bringing, go back to corporations. Sorry. About bringing together a group of corporations that are, could be your small local business, or it could be larger business that helps to underwrite and fuel a conversation going forward. So it's really interesting whenever we talk about corporations at TED. We usually have two reactions to corporations in general. One is corporations are often times trying to use conferences to move forward their agenda, to get speakers on the program or to showcase their work. And the other side of it is that corporations, more importantly, we think of corporations as partners who really want to have an authentic dialogue with the TED community. So when we think about corporations, next please, we think that corporations are truly made up of people. Next, please. And these are people who have ideas, and that is at the core. If we can think about partnership at TED to really focus on the ideas of those people within corporations and to figure out how to showcase some of the amazing innovation coming out of those corporations, then we start with the right place of how to engage with corporations. Next. So we really see that TED is an incubator for...
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you. Next slide. So for us, it all starts with the TED Talk, and it's important to really focus that when we really talk about TED, we're not talking about a conference per se. We're really talking about the notion of a single individual being able to communicate their ideas to a group of people who can then move those ideas forward. So for us, whenever we talk to partners, we always talk about the notion of what a TED Talk is, because that in itself really distinguishes the experience at TED. Next, please.
Okay.
So looks like it's time for another poll.
Awesome. Thanks, Rhonda. And what we want to know is, when you're using the TED.com talks, are you running the ads that go with them? You guys can kind of help us understand. We have about 20% have voted, and we are looking at, wow, for the majority, so and now at about 78%, we'll go ahead and close it out and share. So about 2/3 of you know are not sharing the ads when you run the polls, when you run the TED.com talk. Wow, that's very interesting.
So yeah, so that's really interesting for us, because one of the things that we're trying to think about with the TED Talk is that we have a group of corporations that help us to underwrite the talks to bring them free to the world. And one of the things coming out of this webinar that we'd like to have a larger dialogue with is how do we extend the support of those corporations that are bringing the talks free to the world through the TEDx group? And when is the appropriate place to acknowledge those partners tied to the TED Talk? So Julian, just something to throw out there, as if anyone has any questions back on that or ideas that maybe we can talk about that at the end. So most importantly, going back to the TED Talk is really a way to communicate ideas with passion. And when we talk to TED partners, we talk about using that same notion and intent that the individuals have on the main stage with the intent of what really partners and corporations can do tied to partnership. Next, please. So really, we really see TED as a platform, not really a conference or a TEDx experience, but truly a platform. Next. So oftentimes people say to me, especially partners, say to me, well, wait a minute, what do you mean TED is a platform? And to that I respond, next. Yes, TED is in fact a platform that today when we talk about the TED brand, we talk about it in 3 distinct circles, all with having the same common thread. And the first part of that circle is the TED conferences themselves that we do at TED, and the audience of those who come to those conferences really we see as practitioners of innovation. The second group, which we feel is equally as influential, is, oops.
It got a mind of its own, sorry.
Okay, sorry. The second group is truly the TEDx organizers who are then taking the TED Talks and localizing them and bringing context to relevant conversations, and we see that as very important. And the third is TED.com. So we really look at TED as a wider platform to which you have a very important piece of that equation. So we have another poll, correct?
Yep, yes ma'am. Thanks, Rhonda. And then the next one, so out of curiosity, are you involved in other larger TEDx initiatives? So TEDx Change or TEDx Youth or TEDx Youth Day, TEDx Women? And we have, because Rhonda, it's really interesting when you're talking about seeing it, it's almost kind of like rings that go out. So, with TED at the center and then that creates a really good mental image.
Yeah, and I think that's great too with some of these initiatives that we're doing to see how TEDx organizers are coming together behind major initiatives as well. So I'm so curious to see the answer.
Well, here we have about 53% are involved in TEDx Women and 28% with TEDx Change, and then we have about 20% with Youth Day. So still really good representation.
So it sounds like having focused initiatives that people can participate in is something that's of great value, and that's something for us to think about with partners as well. So do we lose a slide there?
Nope, we're going forward right here.
Okay. So just in looking overall, looking overall at how we see things moving at TED, what we're really interested in is this notion of ideas and how ideas ultimately lead to conversation. And conversation is really the networking aspect of what you deliver at the TEDx events. And then how does that conversation then lead to collaboration? And collaboration is the notion of at the moment to which an idea is presented to you, what do you want to do with that idea? And how can we come together to move that forward? And that ultimately leads collaboration that leads into action. And we feel that the TEDx groups are a great place to really focus on action and a place where partners can really help to move from ideas all the way to action. And there's a notion that we talk about at TED called action branding, and it's about this participation in this larger movement from ideas to action. Next. So I guess the question is, how and what to ask of partners. Next. So what we try to do for corporations, or what we do for corporations, is we create a framework for how they can work with us. And it comes in a number of different opportunities that, that corporations can participate. Next. So when we think about it, the framework is less about having a logo on a stage and more about how we want them to think about partnerships. So the first thing that we think about is this notion of engaging. How do you engage with the TED community and at your event that is authentic, is intelligent, and we also put here delightful, because it's an opportunity to do something that is very clever at a TEDx event. When we say authentically, oftentimes, as I said, partners will come to us and say, what can I do to give a talk or to be a part of the content? And what we try to explain to them is that the main stage is really the place that talks are given, and that your opportunity is to bring context around that, and also to showcase innovation. So that is what engage, is one of the pillars of framework that we think about with partners. Next. The second one is we think about how partners can provide us with a level of support. And support can be ranging from the basics that you need to get the conference moving forward. How can partners lend basic infrastructure? What can they do to give you a venue? What can you do with food and beverage? And food and beverage can extend itself not only to the basic food and beverage, but what kind of ideas in food do you want to have, and how can you present that in the food and beverage segment? Basic tech support, filming, and live streaming. So support is a really important way in which partners can get involved in the TEDx events. Next, please. So this is where it gets fun. Now that you have talked about engaging authentically, you've created an infrastructure, now you start talking to corporations about proposing an idea. And this is, we see this at TED coming in two forms. One is, how can you showcase innovation? And that can be done by creating a lab of ideas. Now this is outside your event. You come in and it's really a lab in itself, and it's an opportunity for you to showcase some of the interesting things that people are talking about that are really very forward-looking about where technology is going, or just very futuristic ideas. The second thing is to host a conversation. Now this is very interesting because hosting a conversation and a collaboration is a chance for a group to get together within your TEDx group and to take on a topic. And it allows people to connect on that one topic and to possibly move it forward. So what this does is it takes the networking part of the conference and directs it in a very specific way, and also creates a possible outcome and next step about what a community can do together, or a challenge or a question that they may have together, and how to create an action surrounding it. Next slide. And this is very important, and I talk about this a lot at TED, and this is the notion that partners are coming to TED not only to present ideas, but also to come as learners at TED. And this is an element of partnership that's growing at TED, and it does provide a really interesting revenue opportunity. So it looks something like this. You talk to a corporation and they have a chance to bring a group of their executives to experience TEDx. So you are really curating for them an opportunity for those within a company to engage on a subject. And what you can do is you can host a conversation between speakers and partners. So let's say X company decides they're going to bring a group of executives. They bring those executives. You talk to them prior to the TEDx event, and you share with them about what your theme is and where you're going with it, and the sense of how they can really give some thought to the direction and insight tied to where your theme is going. And then you bring them together with maybe one speaker that you can select together to come have lunch with them, and they can have a very directed conversation. Now, the wonderful thing about this is that those from corporations don't often get to integrate in this way. So we find it's a very powerful way to integrate corporations. And then the outcome of it is that you can create an insights newsletter that corporations can use based on the theme that's presented, or to use some of the talks that you have created and use them as a tool to really catalyze conversation within corporations. So this is a new element of thinking about corporations and partnership tied to your TEDx event that, that again is about bringing corporations as learners. Next. And then that leads to this notion of starting a project. So those who come to your TEDx event are thinking that not only do they want to be inspired by ideas, but they want to move something to action. So this speaks to this idea that you are what you do, and that's generated by action. And that it's really not about telling, it's about doing, and it's about demonstration. So action branding really gives an opportunity for a partner to come in and ask a question of the group, or to create a topic and create an action that comes out of it. It could be something tied to an action that says, let's ride our bike to work tomorrow, or a number of different what we call really micro actions. They don't have to be larger actions, but it's basically a community project that everyone could get involved in that just moves the world forward in a better place. And it feels a sense of movement, that you're starting a project together, and that when you get back together again as a group, you can see how the project has moved forward. Well, this is a great, very powerful way for corporations to get involved by showing the individual intent of a community and coupling that with the intent of a corporation to help move those actions forward. And what you oftentimes find is that corporations have all sorts of interesting action programs that their employees are involved in, and this is a way to catalyze and move those projects forward, not only within their corporations, but to highlight them within the TEDx framework. Next slide. So we have another poll.
Awesome. And we are at poll number 6, and we'd like to know, would you be interested? You guys should see it. I can't even see it on my thing. But Rhonda, can you see the poll question?
Yeah, would you be interested in galvanizing your community around a theme that emerged at TED? So this is speaking about the action element that we just talked about. So if there was an action that came out of TED, larger TED, a TED project outside, let's say, of the TED Prize, for example, would that be something that you think would be great for TEDx organizers to come together and move forward both individually and then collectively as a group?
And the answer is 80% say yes.
That's great. That's really encouraging.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So
what is the challenge? We've presented all of these things. So what's the challenge about moving these ideas forward? Next. So this is the challenge, and that's how do you translate TED into a language that corporations can understand? So when you mention the Innovation Lab, sometimes people say, oh, is that a trade show? Are you suggesting that I get a booth in a trade show? And we have to explain to them, no, this is not like a booth in a trade show. This is actually an opportunity to do something different and engage in a different way. And we don't talk about sponsorship. We talk about partnership. So I think it's an education in working with corporations about the opportunity that TED gives them a chance to do something slightly different to engage with this community, this action-oriented community. And any questions that anyone has about challenges that they have come up against in translating TED into languages corporations can understand, I would be happy to field and answer. Next slide. So who do you ask when you go to a corporation? How do you really approach a corporation? Next slide. And how to manage partners branding at TEDx. So let me start off by saying, who do you go to at corporations? Well, when you are focused on really your localized, and that's one of the things we really look to with TED, how do you really engage local corporations? So this is an opportunity for you to really engage local corporations as if this is really a great economic development opportunity for them centered in innovation. So typically, when we approach corporations, we approach them at the point to which we feel the conversation is most powerful. So in some cases, if we've searched for innovation and we found that there is incredible innovation to showcase, sometimes we go through the R&D innovation group to approach a corporation. If we feel that there is a larger action initiative, sometimes we go through the corporate responsibility group, and sometimes we go through the public affairs and communications group. So there's lots of different ways to approach corporations, and usually we do a tremendous amount of research before we approach a corporation to get a sense through their press releases about what are some of the most exciting things that they're doing, so we can get them to really showcase some forward-thinking things at TED. So the second part to this is how to manage partners branding at TEDx. So we really don't believe that TED is a branding exercise. In other words, oftentimes people will ask, how much signage will I get at TED? And we look at it in two areas. One is we do take a moment on the stage, and we thank partners for what they've done. But more and more we're thinking about this piece in an artistic way. What is an artistic way to present the partner's message on stage that can be an animated piece or something really interesting that even changes the way that we are showcasing branding for TED partners? The program guide certainly is another way to acknowledge them. And then in the setup of an innovation lounge or the hosting of a lunch, well, what we try not to do is to create any backdrops that people can film against and whatnot anytime that people are trying to utilize TED to commercialize the message. We really want to stay away from commercialized branding. Next slide. We also encourage, and I've said this earlier in the presentation, we are really encouraging partners to experiment at TED. So what does that mean? We really talk to partners about the partnership at TED is really a multi-chapter relationship. And so the first time a partner comes with you, it's really a chapter one. And you want them to try new ideas with the TED group, knowing that these are really people who are moving forward ideas, and to watch and learn from them how they respond to your messaging is really important. And that's important to have a feedback cycle to get a sense that not everything is going to work with partners, and we really feel that that learning is a key element. But we always encourage partners to really bring their best game to TED, to really understand that this is an incubator of ideas and that we want to find interesting ways for them to showcase innovation. Next slide. So that's the basis of what we do to talk about TED and partnership. And it would be great at this point, Julianne, to see if there's any questions that people have and for us to have a dialogue supporting the questions that this group has about partnership in general.
Super. Rhonda, that was amazing, and I've been taking some notes on questions, so I have several pages. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Awesome. So a couple of things that came up first, and while we're talking, there will be more questions that come up, so keep writing in your questions. The opportunity to ask hasn't closed. When you first started your presentation, there were a couple questions about sponsor conflicts, when one of the polling questions was asking about, what kind of sponsorship were they looking for, and they were saying they weren't going for larger sponsors because it would create a conflict with local sponsors, and they just wanted to know, how do you manage, quote unquote sponsor conflicts?
Right. So what happens is that typically with the TEDx organizers, that people isolate 5 global 5 global corporations that they all want to talk to. And so it's more of like being central traffic control to really understand the relationship that TEDx groups want to have with a particular corporation. Is there something specific that they have in mind, or if they're focused on a local office of that corporation and there's a specific initiative that they're focused on, and there's an opportunity to get money from that local budget, then we're happy to advance that forward. What typically happens, though, is that people want to just blanketly know, can I go after Nokia or GE or IBM or the larger sponsors without a sense of an intent or a project or an understanding of how to engage. So what we need to do is to get closer to that. At the same time, we're having conversations with the larger corporations and saying to them, so what are your areas of interest? Is there an area of the world that you want to focus on? Or is there a city in the U.S. that you are working on a project, so we can start making that connection between the TEDx groups and the larger corporations? So if you have somebody in your community that you are tied into a specific initiative to a corporation, and there is some small bucket of local money that doesn't necessarily come out of the global budget, then we are encouraging you to have a dialogue with us about that, and we are happy to help to advance that forward. Does that help answer the question, you think, Julianne, from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I think so, and it came up a couple times, right? Because I think that was another one. Essentially, I think it's been unclear about with the large brands, you know, how someone just sent in a question also about what about brands that TED already has a relationship with. So, want to take that one?
So that's really the question. So what we do, just so that you know, is we ask these corporations, when we talk about the TED platform, we talk about TEDx, and we ask them, you know, in terms of the initiatives that you're working on, what projects and programs are you involved in that we could connect you to our local TEDx organizers? So we do have that conversation with corporations. What corporations have asked us is that they prefer not to be called on by the mass group of TEDx organizers, but they want us to talk to them in a very focused, strategic way about how they can utilize this network. And so my response back to the TEDx groups are, if you have a specific idea of how you think one of our major corporations could be interacting with you, and it's something that is localized to your initiative, to an initiative that you're aware about, we are happy to bring that to a corporation. We just want it to be focused and strategic within the framework that I talked about in this in the presentation today. Start a project, engage, showcase innovation, versus just, yeah, we'd like this corporation to support our group.
Well, and you know what I just want to say? I think that's a great point, and to piggyback a little on what you're saying, because I know, you know, I'm doing my 3rd TEDx event, and, you know, sponsorship is something you get into, but it seems that it makes a lot of sense to foster that kind of collaboration, not only between TEDx and TED, but it also creates the possibility for local TEDx events to collaborate, because I know in New York City, you know, we really want to kind of foster the feel-good feelings between different TEDx events, and it seems that kind of channeling through TED on this would take out maybe a little bit of the what people perceive as competition for sponsorship. It seems as though a larger kind of organized conversation with you guys makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want to say, as I heard you talking, I wanted to ask a little bit, where is and what kind of advice did you have? So when you talk about pitching a project and you talk about, you know, there's so many really interesting things in the way to align yourself with partners, but at what point do we say that, no, they're not involved in the program, or do we say that? And so I'm just kind of curious as to how do you strike a balance between the integrity of the program and, you know, a sponsor getting their people on stage. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we do we keep them separate, but we work off of each other.
Okay.
So you have this editorial theme. So as you think about your theme of your TEDx event, and then so the main stage is kind of this very focused energy toward talks that are happening, and we see partners as an opportunity to bring context to that conversation. So everything from the speaker's reception that might have happened the evening before, where it's a chance for a chance to build around it, to the event that happens afterwards, a lunch or a build-up to the event. You know, is there something that's happening to get people ready to attend the event, where there's an opportunity to start the dialogue and chatter before the event starts. So you can get very creative building around the event, that you have the talks themselves on the main stage, but the conversation and networking around it provides really a very powerful opportunity to engage. So we do keep them very, very separate, and it feels very authentic in that way.
Okay, thank you very much. Now here's a question. How do you approach when your partners are also nonprofits?
So, well, when your partners are a nonprofit, one of the things that we talk about at TED is, well, nonprofits sometimes can be social enablers to move a project forward. So you can match a nonprofit with a corporation to try to help them to fund. So if you have a nonprofit that is has an interesting conversation that they can utilize the TED platform to have, and you have a corporation that wants to help to move that forward, that is a great way to think about matching them. So sometimes we think about matching them. Other times we do think about nonprofits sometimes in terms of editorial exhibits. So we may put aside an area to showcase nonprofit. Or another idea to do is to create, for example, a nonprofit lunch. So you can bring together a partner that sponsors a nonprofit lunch, and you can bring together your local nonprofits and give them a chance to showcase something special and create an awareness for a group of nonprofits. So we really try to utilize the TED experience to showcase some of this great work, and we look to corporations or local small business to help to support that in a community-driven way. Nonprofits can oftentimes be the action piece to any project.
Super. I have another question here that says, how do you deal with, and some of these are really specific, we're going to go to some of the larger, more thematic ones, but there are some really kind of specific ones that I know I've heard before too, so I'm going to throw these at you too, Rhonda. How do you deal with an organization that says, if I help you, I will have to help every other TEDx organization in town? What is the best response to have?
Well, that's, I think, what happens when you are really focused with an initiative, and a theme can distinguish that, or an experience can distinguish it. So, you know, if everyone is taking on the same theme, then I think if there are other groups in town and you are all talking the same corporation, it is a chance, and Julianne, you talked about this, about coming together and saying, you know, we want to come together and approach you together, and this is how we can take on a project as a group, and you can get different points of view on a project. So one is through collaboration, and the other one is through distinctive experiences. And so it could be that you may say to a partner, well, actually, what I'm talking to you about is a pre-conference experience, and maybe it's a field trip that we fund together, and maybe what they're focusing on with another TEDx organizer is an innovation lounge. So I think it comes in your creativity in coming up with ideas of how to engage with the corporations versus just focusing on being a TEDx group that is bringing together people. So what distinguishes your community, and what distinguishes your theme, and what distinguishes the experience that you're going to create?
Yeah, I think that's, it's funny because I'll get emails from people. So I'm in New York City, you know, and there are a number of other local events, and I would get emails from people saying, well, what's different there's like some confusion. What's different about your event and from our other events? And the thing I always say is, New York City, it's a huge place, and I think our events, if they're between 50 and 100, 200 people, there's so many ideas in the world to be spreading. I don't see this in sponsorship or otherwise as a competitive. It seems that there's a lot of room for collaboration here. I'm hoping. Here I have another question. Could sponsors be interested in smaller events, 100 to 200 people? If so, what would be their main interest in sponsoring such a small event? And how do we convince them?
So, it's a level of intimacy that smaller events deliver, and so I think again it goes back to creatively communicating the experience that you are creating, and what will distinguish a larger group from a smaller group. So, if you have 50 people coming to your event, and you're curating those 50 people, what are you looking for in those 50 people to come to the event? And how can you create a profile of the kind of person that you're looking for? Are they 50 individuals that have their own networks that will take those ideas forward? Are just 50 individuals that are surrounding ideas? So I think starting to really understand more about your community and distinguishing who your community is within the larger framework of the community. Why does somebody in your community go to a TEDx event versus another event? And really take the time to focus on that, and that will start creating some further distinction.
And you know what, Rhonda, I have to say that what's been so great about this webinar and listening to you speak is I'm able to see the difference. You're talking about partnering, so it's not a matter of asking for money. That's just a byproduct of this relationship that you're building with this corporation where you have some shared ideas, values, projects. Am I getting this?
Yeah, no, that's really it, actually. It's really the opportunity for you is to be a creative marketer around, again, exactly what you said, Julian, what distinguishes your group, and it is in true partnership versus a sponsorship where someone's coming in an opportunity to just be associated and have brand halo to an event. And there is this bigger opportunity with TEDx to change that, as I said, to create a vocabulary around about what's different about TED.
Because essentially we're building, as I'm going through the questions, I'm going to throw some more at you, but as I'm reading these, I think that what's coming across is these are not one-offs. And I know when I think about our partners, these are partners that we're hoping to have for years, that we're building relationships with, that we spend time with. It's not transactional. I don't know if you could
Right, so that's exactly right. So when we talk to partners at TED, we say the conference itself is just the beginning of the conversation, or thinking about where your event fits into the larger context of building something with a corporation. So just going back to just what we had talked about creating the framework of a partnership. So, how does your partnership start before the conference begins? How does it engage with the community? How does the event itself create a highlight to the partnership? And then what is the piece that continues on after the partnership? So I think that when partners feel like they are purchasing in a transactional way, a single event, they think about it differently than when they think about it in the larger context of not only how they can come to TEDx, but how then you are going to bring TEDx back into their corporation or their small business, and what can you do to further build on top of it. And it just creates a longer-term relationship and value to the partnership.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Here's another question. How do I know if the organization is tapping into the global or local budget?
Just by asking that question. Large corporations do have local community budgets, and I think that this is a really important key distinction, because they will tell you, I don't have a budget, but I can go to our corporate people, and when that happens, basically it usually comes to me, and then it gets flipped back, and it goes back to the local. And so, most people do have a small local budget that they can tap into. So it's really about asking that question about what kind of localized budgets do you have to support local community.
And I think, what is making me think, it just as we talk, it seems that it's probably another conversation to have, not on this webinar necessarily, is what kind of does the budget look like, so that people really know what do they need, what are they asking for. But let's go on to some more questions here. For you, Rhonda, does it count as strategic if the major brand is headquartered in your city?
Does it count? Well, yeah, so I'm always open to that. I believe that corporations should support their local TEDx organizers, and I always make sure that that conversation is included in my larger conversation. So if you have a corporation that is headquartered, its global headquarter is in your market, and you want to approach them, in that case, I'm happy to approach them together. And I'm a big believer of that. So great question.
Yeah. Does TED Women have a budget to support TEDx's, or will all funding come from outside corporations?
So all funding comes from outside corporations for the actual events themselves.
Okay. And here is another one. Last year at TED, there was at least one commercial. I think this is important because it struck something in my head. There was at least one commercial that played from the main stage. That seems counter to the TED culture. Is that something we should expect to see more of?
So that's really interesting, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about an initiative that we're focused on at TED that we are just launched in the last 2 weeks. So what happened was, to give you a little bit about history, one of the things that we use commercials for on the main stage is a palate cleanser. So you just heard a really heavy talk, or you just finished a session, or you're beginning a session, and sometimes we play a commercial which is completely unrelated to sponsors. They're just commercials that we find are completely delightful and interesting and have a sense that, that are clever, for example. And they're not tied to sponsors at all. So, so that, just to give you that framework on it. But what we really started thinking about recently is this notion that ideas we're spreading, which is central to TED, should also be integrated into advertising we're spreading. And so we have created, and it's not advertising, I'm sorry, it's ads we're spreading. And this taps into the notion that, in general terms, people don't like advertising. They don't like it to be done in a very disruptive way. But there are ads that people love, and it's an opportunity to showcase those ads. So we are launching an initiative at TED called Ads We're Spreading, and at our own event in March, instead of just having those commercials be commercials that we just curate that we love, again, completely unrelated to sponsorship. Now we are going to have a submission process where people can submit to us ads that they love, and we will use those times on the main stage to showcase what we're calling earned media, not paid media. So they will not be paid for. And then the last week in March, we will dedicate a full week on TED.com where we'll take off all paid advertising and just put on what we call earned advertising. So that's the role of how we see those commercials. They're not connected to sponsors, but it is a great way to utilize them to messages that you think are interesting messages that are just delightful and interesting.
Well, and just to piggyback on that a little bit, so then in the earlier polling question where we asked about whether or not the licensees were leaving the ads that were linked to the videos, I mean, is this something that ultimately you would see getting the TEDx community involved in, so maybe from some of the advertising that, we're spreading that TED chooses? I'm just kind of wondering, looking down the road, how do you see this playing out to involve the TEDx community?
No, I think that's an excellent question. So right now, when you get a TED Talk, the advertising is stitched at the end of the talks. It's just how we deliver it. And so if you're taking the ads off of them, which it sounds like you are, then just giving us a chance to think about that. Is there a way that you want to create a slide that acknowledges those partners that are bringing TED Talks to the world for free instead of playing the commercial? And then does that allow us to bubble up and approach larger TED corporations about supporting local TEDx organizers who are acknowledging the larger corporations that are helping to bring TED Talks free to the world? So that's just something that I'm thinking about what is a way, and my intent here is what is the way to get corporations, larger TED corporations, more involved in localized TED events, and to start showing them ways in which they are involved. So some feedback on that would be great.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting initiative. Okay, a couple more questions. These questions actually are from the notes I took during I wanted to just ask you, when you talk about kind of like the approach and how part of your presentation was about approaching corporations, and you said maybe the R&D innovation group or the corporate responsibility, I guess I'm just kind of wondering, because, everything is relationships, and how would you find an inroad into a corporation that you wanted to target? So probably for you it's easy, you're with TED, but for kind of the local organizers, did you have any advice for them on how they might go about either networking their way in, or should they be cold calling? How might they go ahead and start the conversation?
Right. So I start off by engaging. And so my process of looking for partners is less about, again, this transactional nature. But what I usually do is and Julianne, you know this because I see you do this often, I go out in search of innovation. So I start on a mission of innovation, and I start off with my local communities, or if I was a TEDx organizer, I would start off with my local communities and ask the question, where does innovation live in my local community? Who's doing it? Who are the individuals who are leading innovation? And I would bring them together collectively or individually, and I would talk to them about what we're doing with TED or what we're doing with TEDx. Sometimes what happens is that people say, that's great, but I don't really understand what TED is. So then I try to send them some TED Talks and get them engaged on something that's relevant to them. And then oftentimes, it's in inviting them to come to one event, and then we call it the get it factor at TED. Actually engaging them in the experience, they walk away and they say, oh, I get it, and these are some ways that I can see, connecting going forward. So at TED, we don't really look at it as a one-off, and we start it as a growing relationship. And I think that what speaks to that is that I would say close to 90% of our partners have come back year after year. And so we set it up so it's a growing partnership and one that's not just coming in on a transactional level. And just back again, really thinking about what are their own internal programs that they're doing that are very TED-like within their corporations. A lot of them are spending money on local sales meetings or getting people together. Those are budgets that you can tap into and say, instead of doing your, corporate meeting at your corporation, why don't you make this TEDx your corporate meeting and send, 5 leaders from your corporation to attend, and then bring that back to your group. So again, it's in the creativity of really understanding where innovation lives in your community.
A great answer. That's a great answer. Let me ask you one other question, and this is from my own ignorance, so you have to forgive me. When you talk about the feedback cycle, can you maybe, because my background's not in business, but can you maybe tell me a little bit more about what you mean?
So the feedback cycle is back to experimentation. And so, sometimes I'll have a partner that comes to TED and we'll experiment with something, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And it's all about human nature and how they interact with ideas. So what I try to do is to create a feedback cycle so that after a TED event, I actually go back to all the executives that attended from that corporation, and I ask them to give me their personal views about what their experience was at TED. And I try to add to that the feedback that I got through the survey about their event. So here would be a specific example. So a partner wants to do a lunch. They want to do a panel lunch because one of their executives has something to talk about. So you do a panel lunch, and you know, on the stage you're very sensitive to speakers to tell them, you know, don't go over your 18 minutes, and, you know, be very vulnerable in what you're presenting. But you don't oftentimes take the same amount of time to spend time with a sponsor or a partner on how they should conduct themselves for their lunch. You figure, you know what, they're giving us money, so let them do what they want to do. And oftentimes that's a huge mistake. And so you allow them to talk. They talk in language that is, you know, very vertical to their world. And their executives can walk away with one sense of what the experience is, and those who attended can walk away with a completely other sense of what that experience is. So what I try to do after a conference is to marry the two and make it be a learning experience, because ultimately what we're in the business of with TED is how to help people better present ideas. The TED Talk is about a single individual being able to present their ideas. So we want corporations to get better at figuring out how to present ideas, and that feedback cycle of how people responded to what they did at a TEDx event is really important.
That's such, it's such valuable information, because I know for I have an event in 2 weeks. We have a speaker dinner with some of our biggest sponsors coming, and it's such things that I personally would never have considered. So thank you so much. Let me bring up, so we have a few more questions I think are interesting from the audience. Can we promise partners ads at the end of the TEDx talk? Is that something that's happening?
Can we? Basically, once the talks go up on TED.com, then that is a different partnership model. What's going on to supporting the localized TED events, and the way that it works is that when corporations support TED.com, their ads rotate on random TED Talks. In other words, we say to them, you're going to get a certain amount of an audience viewing of your message, and then through the system, it randomly rotates their ads against talks. And then we are starting to create libraries of talks that come together, but we never really focus on delivering any of our partners any one talk specifically.
And so just because to make sure to kind of drill down a little bit, if by chance your TEDx talk is chosen to go up on TED.com, then it becomes proprietary of TED, and they're going to partner it in their way. And on TEDx YouTube channel, there are no ads running with the talk. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure that that's not we can offer.
Yes.
Yeah, not offerable. Someone else says, can we show a commercial? We are approaching IBM here, and they have ads worth spreading.
Well, so what I'm hearing there is, can we show a commercial of a partner within the program? Julianne, do you think that's the question? Do you think in general, can you show an ad?
No, I think that it is high. It's like, partner. I mean, yes, I think you hit it on the nail on the head. I would say, since they're approaching IBM, they're saying, can we offer that to them that they can have a spot during the program?
Right. So no, we don't. Whenever it feels like there's commercial interest there and it feels like it's pay to play, then we don't offer it. If you feel, we have this with TED Women, where we have a series of films that the partners are going to showcase, and we're actually creating a room outside of the main stage where people can view those films. So we really separate it, but there is an opportunity in the, let's say, Innovation Lounge. We've done some really interesting work with IBM where in that way you can show it, but not, we don't allow that with sponsors, no, partners.
And I just want to say from my own event, we have our big partner is BBC, and so what we are doing is when our official program ends in the same venue, they're doing something different. It's not co-branded, but that was another opportunity for them to kind of have access to the speakers, host a panel, bring someone in. So we figured out what they wanted, and then we kind of built around that to really foster the partnership so that they feel good about it, we feel good about it, we're excited about what they're doing. That's okay, right, Rhonda?
Yeah, again, as long as it's not part of the main program and
Yep.
people are aware, this is not part of the main program, but X partner would love for you to stay and share with you their ideas. And that's like the workshop piece of it too.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if they're showing, if they're pulling together an interesting conversation that, again, is not a TED Talk, it may be that BBC is doing an interesting conversation that others can participate in, or IBM is doing a demo jam after where they're showing you some interesting demo stuff that they're doing. As long as it's not a TED Talk or using the TED stage to commercialize their message, then you can build something around it.
Nice. It's nice to offer. Here's one more question. Is there a fee structure that can be used as a basis for the partner? Example, cost for an ad, innovation lounge.
So, up until now, we haven't, we've really let TEDx organizers figure out what their needs are and then figure out what they needed to charge. So we do have a very specific fee structure tied to TED, and I guess maybe we should have asked that maybe as one of the polling questions. So maybe Julian, I don't know, is a good takeaway, but would it help TEDx organizers if we suggested a fee structure based on the size of the group?
You know what it seems like from some of the questions I'm seeing, that a webinar basically on kind of, budget parameters is probably needed, because I think people aren't sure how do you do in kind, how much in kind. So yeah, I think that's a really good getting more stuff. But I can do a follow-up. In the follow-up email, I'll send out a survey and they can share with us with their questions, and then we can put our heads together. We can create a feedback cycle. How does that sound? I'm going to use that now.
That sounds great.
Awesome. Well, listen, it's 10:02, so I such a rich conversation. It looks like we got through most every one of the questions. There were a couple very long questions I got emailed to me. I forwarded those on to Rhonda, just so you guys know. And Rhonda, such an incredible dialogue. Thank you so much for taking the time and preparing. We really, really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, and I look forward to continued, conversation and collaboration.
Definitely. All right. Well, listen, you have a great day, and TEDx organizers, thanks for joining us. This will be posted by the end of today. I'll send out the link so that you have it. You can watch it and listen to it again. And always suggestions or needs that you have for other webinars, we're always happy to entertain those. So send them in. So now we're going to sign off, and you guys have a great day. Thanks. Bye.